This is a story about the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid dynasty, an ancient civilization that stretched from Egypt to the edge of India, from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. The people who built it called their land Persia. 2,500 years later, that same territory became the country we now call Iran. Same land, different world. 334 BC, spring. A 21-year-old king crosses from Europe into Asia with an army of approximately 35 to 40,000 soldiers. Behind him, Macedon, a small kingdom on the northern edge of the Greek world. In front of him, the Achaemenid Persian Empire, one of the greatest political structures the ancient world had ever seen. A civilization that had ruled its vast territories for over 2 centuries, wealthy, sophisticated, and militarily powerful in ways that dwarfed anything Macedon could field. The Persian satraps, regional governors controlling the western provinces, heard that Alexander had crossed the Hellespont. They assembled their forces at the Granicus River to stop him before he could advance any further. They expected to crush him quickly and send him back to Europe. They had every reason to be confident. They were wrong in a way that would change the entire ancient world. And to understand why, you first need to understand what the Persian Empire actually was, and where its hidden weakness lived. The Persian Empire was not a nation-state. It was a vast, multi-ethnic system built around satrapies, regional provinces ruled by governors who owed loyalty and tribute to the great king in Persepolis. Each region contributed soldiers who spoke different languages, carried different weapons, and fought according to different traditions. From the outside, this looked like overwhelming strength. For most of its history, it was. The system had allowed Persia to dominate the known world for generations, but it had a structural weakness that only became visible under very specific pressure. Coordinating a multi-ethnic army in the chaos of actual battle required more than numbers. It required unified command, shared doctrine, and a chain of authority that held under stress. And the entire structure depended on one thing above all else: the personal credibility of the great king. The king was not simply a commander. He was the living center of imperial legitimacy. The belief that the empire could protect its subjects, reward loyalty, and punish defiance, all of it flowed from him personally. If that center held, the system held. If the king was seen to fail, to flee, to lose, the machinery that held together dozens of cultures across thousands of miles began to seize. Alexander understood this before he crossed a single river. His entire campaign was designed around it. His army was smaller, but it was built on a completely different principle. And that difference would prove decisive at every critical moment of the campaign to come. Philip II of Macedon had spent 20 years building the finest military force in the Greek world. The Sarissa phalanx, infantry carrying 18-foot pikes in tight formation, presented a wall of overlapping spearheads that no cavalry charge could break through. Behind it, elite companion cavalry could strike at speed at exactly the right moment, precisely when the phalanx had fixed the enemy line and a gap had opened. This was not a tribal levy. It was a professional army trained together, experienced together, operating under a unified doctrine. Alexander had grown up inside this machine. He had trained with these men since childhood. He understood what they could do not from theory, but from years of watching his father use them to transform Macedon into the dominant power of the Greek world. But Alexander had one additional advantage that no training could provide. He led from the front. Not from a command position on a hill, not through messengers. He rode with the companion cavalry at the point of the attack, at the moment of maximum danger, visible to every soldier on the field. An army watching its king charge into battle behaves differently from an army watching its king observe from safety. The momentum that generates, the belief that victory is possible because the man with everything to lose is also the first to risk it. That belief is not measurable. but it is real.
At the Granicus River, in May of 334 BC, Alexander demonstrated it in a way that nearly killed him.
The Persian satraps had positioned their cavalry along the far bank of the Granicus. It was a strong defensive choice. The water was deep enough to slow any crossing. The far bank was steep. Any army attempting to cross would arrive in disorder, struggling uphill through water, formation broken, momentum gone before contact. Alexander's senior general, Parmenion, advised caution. Wait until morning. Cross at dawn in better conditions. It was the tactically sensible recommendation. It was exactly what the Persian commanders expected. Alexander rejected it immediately. His reasoning was not recklessness. A night's pause gave Persian commanders time to reinforce, reposition, or withdraw to more favorable ground. Speed was Alexander's most consistent weapon. He forced decisions before the Persian system could coordinate a response. Giving up even one night meant surrendering that advantage. He ordered an immediate assault and led his companion cavalry into the river.
What followed was brutal. The Macedonians crossed under heavy fire, fighting uphill against horsemen with the advantage of solid ground. In the chaos on the far bank, Alexander was personally attacked. A Persian commander struck him with a weapon that penetrated his helmet and grazed his scalp. A second attacker came from behind with a raised sword. One of Alexander's companions cut the man down before the blade fell. The future conqueror of the known world survived the Battle of the Granicus by a matter of inches. Then, the Persian line broke, and everything changed. Once the cavalry line broke, the Macedonian infantry phalanx crossed and completed the destruction of the satrapal force. The Persian commanders who had assembled to stop Alexander at the very first obstacle were killed, captured, or scattered. The battle itself was not prolonged. By the standards of Issus and Gaugamela, the Granicus was a limited engagement, but what it unlocked was enormous. With Persian authority over the western satrapies shattered in a single afternoon, the political landscape of Asia Minor began to shift. Greek cities under Persian control for generations started opening their gates. They made the calculation that cities always make when power shifts. They looked at what had just happened and chose the side that appeared to be winning. Alexander was careful about how he received them. He was not simply a conqueror demanding tribute. He offered autonomy, restored local governance, and paid his respects at local temples. He positioned himself as a liberator from Persian tyranny rather than a new occupier. Whether this was genuine conviction or calculated politics, historians still debate it. What is not debatable is that it worked. City after city accepted Macedonian authority without significant resistance. Alexander was building something more durable than a military victory, a political base, a network of cities and peoples who had reason to prefer his rule over Persian restoration. And he was doing it while moving fast. Because somewhere to the east, the great king was receiving reports of what had just happened. Those reports demanded a response. There is a detail about the Granicus that most accounts move past too quickly, because it speaks directly to the systemic reasons why Persia was already losing before the main campaign had truly begun. The Persian satraps who assembled at the Granicus had received advice from a Greek mercenary commander in Persian service named Memnon of Rhodes. Memnon was one of the most capable military minds of his era, and he understood Alexander's approach better than anyone around him. His advice was specific and strategically sound. Do not engage Alexander directly. Instead, destroy crops and resources as he advanced. Deny him the ability to feed his army. Force him to fight a logistical war rather than a military one. Pull him east until his supply lines collapsed and his soldiers were exhausted. Then, finish him. The Persian satraps rejected this advice. Giving up territory without a fight was beneath their dignity. It would make them look weak. It would suggest that Persian power could not defend its own lands. This decision was not driven by military logic. It was driven by political considerations, personal prestige, fear of appearing to concede, unwillingness to accept temporary sacrifice for long-term advantage.
They chose to fight at the Granicus on terms that favored Alexander. They lost. Memnon would attempt a version of his strategy later, operating in the Aegean to threaten Alexander's lines of communication. But he died of illness in 333 BC before it could succeed.
The empire's most capable strategic thinker was removed from the board, not by battle, but by fate. And with him went the plan that might have worked. Darius III had become great king under difficult circumstances. His two predecessors had been assassinated in rapid succession before Alexander's campaign began. He came to the throne in 336 BC, the same year Alexander became king of Macedon, as a stabilizing figure, a man the Persian court believed could hold together an empire shaken by internal violence. He was not a weak man. Sources that reduced Darius to a simple coward misread both the person and the situation. He was an emperor trying to defend a vast, decentralized realm against an enemy whose speed was unlike anything the Persian system had been built to handle. The satraps of Asia Minor had been the empire's first line of defense. They had failed. That was serious. But the empire was still intact. Its resources were still enormous. Alexander had won a battle on the western edge of a civilization that extended thousands of miles to the east. Darius made his assessment clearly. The satraps had acted without sufficient central coordination. They had met Alexander piecemeal, with regional forces, without the full weight of imperial resources. He would not repeat that mistake. He would assemble the full power of the empire. He would meet Alexander personally on the battlefield. He would bring numbers large enough that the outcome could not be in doubt. He began gathering his army. He chose his position carefully, ground where his numerical advantage would be decisive. He had not yet understood that Alexander's greatest advantage was not his army, his tactics, or even his personal courage. It was his speed. And the Persian system was not built to match it. While Darius assembled his forces to the east, Alexander moved south along the Aegean coast of Asia Minor. This phase receives less attention because it contains no major battle, but it was not simply a march between engagements. It was where Alexander demonstrated something that would define his entire approach to conquest. Military victory and political control are not the same thing, and one without the other is unstable. Sardis, one of the most important Persian administrative centers in Asia Minor, surrendered without resistance. Alexander restored local customs and governance structures immediately, presenting Macedonian control as continuity rather than disruption. At Ephesus, he restored democratic governance. He ordered the Temple of Artemis, one of the great religious monuments of the ancient world, honored and protected. Where Persian garrisons resisted, as at Miletus and Halicarnassus, he took them by force. But he treated civilian populations with deliberate restraint. The pattern was consistent. Cooperation was rewarded. Resistance was overcome militarily. Persian administration was replaced, but local life continued. None of this was purely idealistic. Alexander needed the cities of Asia Minor to be stable and supplied as his lines extended east. An empire held by terror requires constant military presence. An empire whose subjects see cooperation as preferable to resistance holds itself. He was 21 years old, operating according to a political logic that many rulers twice his age never grasped. By the time he turned inland towards Cilicia, he had not just won a battle. He had built the foundation of an administration. And ahead of him, Darius was waiting. By late 334 BC, approximately 6 months after crossing the Hellespont, Alexander had secured the western coast of Asia Minor and was advancing south towards Cilicia. He had not yet faced the full power of the empire. The Granicus had been a regional engagement. The forces of the western satraps, significant but not representative of what Persia could field when the great king himself mobilized. Darius was mobilizing now, fully,
personally. What he was assembling reflected the scale at which he now understood the threat. This was no longer a border problem that provincial governors could handle. This required the personal intervention of the King of Kings, with the complete resources of the empire behind him. The coming engagement would differ from the Granicus in one critical way. At the Granicus, the tactical problem had been a river crossing, a question of getting across a defended obstacle. At the next battle, geography itself would become the central factor. A narrow coastal corridor between mountains and sea, where the available space would determine whether Persian numerical superiority could actually be deployed, or whether the empire's greatest advantage would be physically neutralized by the terrain. Darius chose a position believing his numbers would be decisive. He did not fully understand how the ground would constrain him. Alexander moved toward the same corridor without yet knowing precisely where the Persian army was. Two men, converging on the same narrow strip of coast. One of them was about to discover that the ground he had chosen was his enemy as much as Alexander was. The Battle of the Granicus established the pattern that would repeat until the empire fell. Alexander moved fast. He struck before Persian coordination could respond. He combined military force with political outreach. He led from the front in a way that generated momentum his opponents could not match. And he did all of this against an imperial system whose structure made it slow to adapt, slow to concentrate, and dependent on the personal credibility of a king who had not yet been tested in the field. The satraps failed not because they were cowards or incompetents. They failed because they faced an enemy the system was not designed for. Smaller, faster, more cohesive, and willing to force a decision at the moment of maximum Persian disadvantage. The one man who had proposed a strategy that might have worked, Memnon of Rhodes, was overruled for political reasons and then died of illness before he could try again. And so the campaign continued. Alexander advanced. Darius assembled the full power of his empire and moved to intercept. The two men who had never met were now converging on a narrow coastal corridor where mountains fell directly to the sea, where the space available was only a few miles wide, and where a Persian army far larger than Alexander's force would discover that numbers alone cannot win a battle on ground that will not let you use them. That engagement, at a place called Issus, is where Darius made his first catastrophic personal mistake, where he looked across a battlefield, saw what was coming, and chose to run.